Hello, I'm Carlton Van Putten, founder and CEO of PayRent. Welcome to the Keys to Success podcast, where we unlock the secrets to smarter investments, smoother tenant management, and bigger profits, one episode at a time. Ready to master your property game? Let's dive in.
Welcome back to Keys to Success, where we unlock your rental knowledge one lock at a time. And today, we're going to be talking about 30-day notices to vacate. You know, those can be a real pain for landlords, but we're going to break down everything you need to know to use them right and keep everything legal.
Happy to be here. You know, people often think of 30-day notices as the first step to eviction, but they don't have to be, a confrontation. When you handle them the right way, they can really protect you and your tenant.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think a lot of landlords can feel intimidated by the legal stuff. So let's just start with the basics. What exactly makes a 30-day notice legally valid?
It's kind of like a recipe. You need the right ingredients. First, you need the date the notice is issued and the date the tenant is supposed to move out, which should be the same as when rent is due.
Okay, so like if rent is due on the 1st of the month and I give the notice on the 15th, the tenant still has until the 1st of the next month, not 30 days from when I give the notice.
Right, and you have to say why you are giving the notice. Some states don't require a reason if you are not renewing the lease, but it's always a good idea to include one, just to be clear and avoid confusion.
That makes sense. Now, what about Sarah's story? You know, she was a good tenant, but still got a notice.
Yeah, Sarah's situation shows why even good tenants might get one of these notices. It wasn't because she was a bad tenant, it was because the landlord decided to sell the property. What's important is that because she had a good rental history and a good credit score, she could find a new place easily.
So even if you can't avoid getting a notice, sometimes having a good record as a tenant can help.
For sure. And that goes for landlords too. Like, tenants want a good landlord. You want good tenants who take care of your property. A good reputation is important for everyone.
So going back to the recipe, what else do we need to make sure a 30-day notice is legal?
You need to put the address where you will send anything else about the security deposit or other stuff. And of course, you need your signature as the lender.
Okay, pretty straightforward.
Yep.
What about extra information, like if the tenant owes rent or if there are repairs that need to be done? Do you need to include that?
It's not always required, but it's a smart move to include all the details, even if you think they're small. It can help avoid disagreements later. For example, if there is damage to the property more than normal wear and tear, you should say that in the notice, so the tenant knows what to expect.
So it's about being thorough and transparent from the beginning.
Yes, exactly. And our source also says it's good to include the contact information for the new tenant if you know who that is.
That's interesting. Why is that helpful?
Because it makes the transition smoother. The old tenant can talk to the new tenant directly about things like exchanging keys. It's less work for you. Plus, it shows that you are trying to make things easy for everyone.
Yeah, I like that. It's a simple thing that can prevent a lot of headaches.
And another thing you can do is have a witness sign the notice. It's not required, but it can give you extra legal protection if there are any problems later on.
Like an extra layer of security.
Right. It makes your documentation stronger and creates a clearer paper trail. So now let's move on to how you actually deliver the notice. How do you get it to the tenant in a legal way?
Right. So we have our perfectly written 30-day notice. What are the ways to deliver it?
Well, there are a few options. But remember, laws can be different in different states. So always check your local laws. The simplest way is to deliver it personally. You hand it to the tenant and they sign it to show they received it.
That sounds easy enough.
Yeah.
But what if the tenant is avoiding me? Or what if I can never find them at home?
Then your best bet is to send it by certified mail and request a return receipt. That way you have a legal proof that they got the notice, even if they refuse to sign for it.
So you can avoid the "I never got it" excuse later.
Exactly. You can also post and mail it. That means you post a copy of the notice on the tenant's door and also mail them a copy.
So you're really making sure they get the message.
Right. And if you're comfortable with technology, you can also email and fax it. But only if your lease agreement says that's okay.
Got it. Always check the lease agreement. That's the rule book for the landlord-tenant relationship. Speaking of which, can you remind our listeners about how important the lease agreement is?
Of course. The lease agreement is the foundation of everything. It's a legal contract that says what the terms and conditions are for renting the property, including how much notice you need to give before ending the lease. Both you and the tenant need to understand and follow the lease.
It's like the Constitution for the rental property.
That's a good way to put it. And just like a constitution, it needs to be clear. The more details and specifics you have in the lease, the less likely you are to have arguments or misunderstandings later.
Good point. We've talked about when 30-day notices are usually needed. But are there times when you don't need one?
Yes, there are some exceptions. For example, if you as the landlord don't follow the lease agreement, let's say you don't make necessary repairs or keep the property in a livable condition, then the tenant might be able to break the lease without giving you 30 days notice.
So it's a reminder that as landlords, we have responsibilities too.
Absolutely. It's a two-way street. Other exceptions are when something happens that makes the property unlivable, like a fire or a natural disaster.
It wouldn't be fair to make someone live in a place that isn't safe.
Exactly. And there are also protections for people in the military under the SCRA. That law says that they can't be penalized if they have to break a lease early because they are being deployed or have other military duties.
So it's important to know about these special situations where the usual 30-day notice might not be needed.
Yes, you need to be informed and understand the details of the law.
Okay, so let's say a tenant gets a 30-day notice. What's the first thing they should do?
They should read the whole notice carefully. Don't just skim it. Pay attention to the details, like the move-out date, any money they owe, and what could happen if they don't follow the notice.
So knowledge is power here.
It really is.
Yeah.
Once they understand the notice, they can make good decisions. Some tenants might be having money problems and might just want to ignore the notice, but that is never a good idea.
Yeah, ignoring a problem doesn't make it go away.
Exactly. The best thing to do is to talk to you, the landlord. Explain the situation and see if you can work out a payment plan or something. You might be surprised how many landlords are willing to be flexible if the tenant is honest and tries to work things out.
It's always better to try to find a solution that works for everyone.
Definitely. So once the tenant understands the notice, they have a few options.
Okay, let's go over those. What are their choices?
They could try to negotiate. Maybe they can ask for more time or offer to fix anything that violates the lease. This shows that they want to work things out. And it might be a good option if they really want to stay in the property.
So there's always room for talking and finding some common ground.
A lot of times there is. If they decide that moving out is the best thing to do, then they need to follow the notice and move out by the deadline. And they need to make sure the property is in good condition, as stated in the lease.
Leaving things in good shape helps keep a good relationship, even if they are moving out.
Exactly. It's about ending things respectfully. And remember, if a tenant thinks their rights have been violated, or if they think the notice isn't valid, they can always file an appeal with the right authorities or talk to a lawyer.
So tenants need to know their rights, and they should get legal help if they need it.
For sure. It's about making sure tenants can stand up for themselves.
Now let's talk about the landlord side. Can you remind us about our most important responsibilities?
Sure. As a landlord, you have to provide a safe and livable place. That means taking care of maintenance, making repairs on time, and making sure things like electricity and water are working.
It's about creating a place where tenants feel comfortable and safe.
Yes. And you have to respect the tenant's right to quiet enjoyment of the property. That means you can't bother them or interrupt them for no reason.
It's their home even if they're renting it.
Exactly. And of course, you have to give them proper notice if you want them to move out or if you are evicting them. You have to follow all the laws and treat your tenants fairly and respectfully. That's all part of being a good landlord.
So it's a balancing act. We have to do our part and respect the tenant's rights.
It is. When both sides understand their roles and responsibilities, you have a much better landlord-tenant relationship.
We've mentioned state laws a few times. Why is it so important for landlords to know about the different laws in different states?
Because the rules can be very different from state to state. Things like how much notice you need to give, how evictions work, and rules about security deposits, they can all be different. If you just rely on general knowledge, you could make expensive mistakes.
So you really have to do your research and understand the local laws.
Absolutely. And if you are not sure about something, it's always best to talk to a lawyer or your local housing authority.
Better be safe than sorry when it comes to legal stuff. Now let's talk about the big question. What happens if a tenant just ignores a 30-day notice?
Ignoring a notice is never the right thing to do. It can lead to a lot of bad things happening, like being evicted by a court order.
So it's serious business.
Yes, it is. Ignoring it will only make things worse.
Besides being evicted, what else could happen?
They could end up owing back rent money for damages and even legal fees. That can really hurt their credit score and make it hard for them to rent again in the future.
So it could turn into a big financial mess.
Yes, it could. And in some cases, ignoring a notice could even mean the police come and force them to leave.
So it's clear that both landlords and tenants need to take the 30-day notice seriously.
Exactly. It's about respecting the legal process, doing what you're supposed to do, and avoiding conflict and financial problems.
It's a win-win for everyone.
I agree. It creates a better and more respectful relationship between landlords and tenants. Yeah, it's about having a system where everyone feels like they're being treated fairly.
Well said. So to wrap things up, what's the one thing you would tell our listeners about 30-day notices?
I would say understanding how 30-day notices work is so important for being a successful landlord. It's about protecting your property, avoiding legal problems, and having good relationships with your tenants.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, before we go, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. How can landlords make giving these notices less stressful for everyone?
That's a great question. I think it comes down to communication, being understanding, and remembering that both landlords and tenants have needs that are important.
I really like that. It's about finding a balance and being fair.
Exactly. And sometimes that means doing more than just the minimum that's required by law. Maybe you give the tenant a few extra days to move out if they have always been a good tenant, or maybe you give them some resources to help them find a new place to live.
Those are good examples.
Yeah.
It's about remembering that we are all human.
Right. And even small things like that can make a big difference in keeping a good relationship with your tenant, even if they are moving out.
And a good relationship is good for everyone. It builds trust, makes communication easier, and just makes things smoother overall.
Exactly. When both sides feel respected and heard, it's a good foundation for a successful rental experience that benefits everyone.
That's a great point.
Right.
Now, speaking of successful rental experiences, I have to mention Parent. Their online rent collection platform is a game changer for landlords. It makes everything so much easier, from getting rent payments to communicating with tenants.
It really is a great tool. It has features like automatic reminders, and you can accept different payment methods. Parent makes collecting rent much smoother for everyone.
And when landlords have less stress, they have more time to focus on other things.
Exactly. It's about working smarter, not harder. And Parent definitely helps with that.
A big thank you to our expert for sharing their knowledge with us today.
You're welcome.
And to all our listeners, be sure to tune in to our next episode of Keys to Success, where we will unlock even more secrets to becoming a great landlord. Until then, happy renting. And remember, knowledge is the key to success in the rental world. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep those keys turning.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Keys to Success. I invite you to check out past episodes and follow us on your favorite podcast platform to get notified when new ones are released. And when you're ready to simplify managing your properties, be sure to visit us at www.payrent.com.